It wasn't the first time she'd canceled on me, but it was the first time it truly hit me. You know how they say you don't realize what you've got until it's almost gone? Well, I was there, standing in front of the mirror, trying to make sense of the mess that had become my life, trying to figure out how to piece together a version of myself that didn't feel invisible. It was our anniversary, or at least it was supposed to be. The plans we'd made, the dinner at the restaurant we loved, the quiet evening we'd look back on in years to come. It was all slipping through my fingers. I could hear her voice, sweet and detached, as she told me, "I really can't tonight, babe. Work dinner with the boss. I'll make it up to you, I swear." She had a way of saying things that made it hard to argue, like she was doing me a favor by choosing work over our time together. I'd heard the excuses before, but this time, something felt different. Something inside me, buried for months or maybe years, decided I'd had enough. This wasn't just another night of her choosing work, her choosing anything over me. This was the night I stopped pretending it didn't matter. There's something strange that happens when you've been ignored long enough. You stop asking for attention. You stop seeking validation. It's like you start to disappear in your own life, becoming a shadow of the person you used to be. I wasn't that man, not anymore. She'd put on that smile as she walked out the door, like nothing was wrong. She had no idea that this time, she wouldn't come home to the same person. She wouldn't find me sitting there, patient and willing to forgive the 1,000 tiny cuts she had made over the years. No, tonight was different. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I grabbed my phone. There was something satisfying about typing out a message that would change everything. No drama, no big speech, just a simple sentence that would rip away the thin veil we'd lived under for so long. "I'll be out when you get back. Don't bother calling." I hit send and placed the phone on the counter. My hands were shaking, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to feel anything, not yet. For years, I tried to hold on to something that wasn't even there anymore, something that was never there to begin with. She wasn't the woman I married anymore, and I had stopped being the man who'd let it slide. The thought of her coming home later, seeing me gone, would be the moment she realized it was over. But even that thought didn't bring me peace. It was just a necessary step in a journey I hadn't fully understood until now. I didn't make any plans. I didn't pack a bag. I wasn't going anywhere extravagant. I wasn't running away. I was just walking away from something that didn't exist anymore. My life was no longer about waiting for her to notice, waiting for her to change. It was about me, the person I had forgotten for so long. For the next few hours, I just existed. I sat there, staring at the empty couch, at the space she should have filled, but wouldn't. It wasn't a bad night. In fact, it was liberating. I wasn't waiting anymore. I had made my choice, and for once, I was doing something for me. As the hours passed, the weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't tied to her anymore. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her to apologize. I needed nothing but my own freedom. When she walked in, hours later, I was gone. The room was silent. My coat, my shoes, everything that belonged to me was gone, except for the note on the kitchen counter. "Don't call me again. I'm done." It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a declaration. It was just the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The first few hours after I left felt almost surreal. There was this strange clarity in my mind, like I had just broken free from some invisible chain that had kept me tethered to a life that never really felt like my own. I wasn't sure what was next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to the way things were. I didn't have a destination in mind. My car was parked outside, but I didn't drive anywhere. I just walked. I walked for hours, through the streets I had walked 1,000 times before, but tonight everything felt different. There was no sense of routine, no sense of waiting for her to come home. I wasn't a background character in my own life anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was just numb. It was as if my mind had clicked into a new gear, one where the past no longer mattered, and the future was a blank page. I was ready to fill it with something else. As the night wore on, the first text message came through. I hadn't been expecting it, but it came anyway. "Where are you? I'm really sorry about tonight. I'll make it up to you. Please, let's talk." I read the message over and over again. The words were just words, empty words that had been said 1,000,000 times before. How many times had she promised to make it up to me? How many times had I let it slide, hoping it would change? This time, I didn't respond. I didn't even feel the urge to. There was no please that could fix this. No apology that could erase the years of neglect, the moments when I had been nothing more than an afterthought in her life. It wasn't just about the anniversary. It was about all the little moments where I had been left standing alone, waiting for a woman who was too distracted by everything else to see me. I had been invisible for so long that I didn't even know who I was anymore. I could have gone back, I suppose. I could have answered her text, walked back through the door, and pretended like everything was fine. But there was no going back now. I had already made my decision. As I wandered through the empty streets, I realized how much of my life had been dictated by her. Every choice I made had been influenced by her needs, her desires, her plans. I had molded myself around her, but in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. The man who used to have dreams, goals, ambitions. He was still there, buried under years of compromises. But now, in this moment of freedom, I could feel him coming back to life. I didn't need to wait for her to tell me what was important anymore. I was going to define what mattered for myself. I was going to live a life where I was the priority, not her, not anyone else. Just me. By the time I returned to the apartment, it was close to dawn. I hadn't planned on coming back, but somehow, I knew I had to see her face when she saw what I had left behind. I could feel the tension building up in my chest as I walked through the door. I had left everything behind, but now, I was ready to face what was coming. She was sitting in the living room, staring at her phone, her face pale. I could tell she had been crying, probably for hours. But when she looked up at me, there was no anger, no fury, just confusion. "Henry, what the hell is going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where did you go?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. I wasn't the same man who had been waiting for her call, waiting for her to realize what she was doing to me. I wasn't the same man who had been silently watching his marriage fall apart. "I'm done," I said, my voice calm and steady. This is over." She stood up, as if to reach for me, but I took a step back. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't scared of her tears, her apologies. "I don't understand," she whispered. "We can fix this. I promise we can fix this." I shook my head, not out of anger, but out of a deep sense of finality. "No, Sarah, you don't get it. I've been trying to fix this for so long. I've been trying to fix us, but I've been the only one trying." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? Whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. The decision had already been made. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, frozen, as I walked past her and out the door. There was nothing left to say. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew that for the first time in years, I was living for myself. And it felt like freedom. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't hear from Sarah for a while, and that should have been expected. What could she possibly say to a man who had walked out on everything they'd built together? I didn't expect an apology, nor did I need one. The silence was its own answer, and it was everything I needed to understand just how far I had fallen. I spent my time in the city, moving through it like a ghost, avoiding familiar places, avoiding people who might ask where I had been or what had happened. I was a man on his own, trying to figure out what this new version of me was supposed to look like. I didn't want to go home. That apartment, once filled with the promise of a future, now felt like a prison. Even the thought of it made my skin crawl. It had been our place, our shared space where dreams had been spoken aloud, only to wither away. Now it was just a shell, an empty reminder of all the things I had allowed myself to ignore for so long. I rented a small room in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The bed was small, the walls thin, but it didn't matter. It was quiet, the way I needed it to be. For the first time in years, I didn't have to answer to anyone. There was no one demanding my attention, no one's expectations to live up to. It was just me and the four walls, and I could finally hear my own thoughts. But even in this quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I should have been. But the anger I thought I'd feel, the rage that was supposed to rise up when she betrayed me yet again, it wasn't there. What I felt, instead, was something far worse, emptiness. I found myself thinking about the way things used to be. How I used to wait for her to come home, eagerly anticipating the sound of her footsteps on the porch. How we would talk about our days, and it felt easy. It didn't feel easy anymore. It felt like a game I had been playing without knowing the rules. A game where I was always losing. always waiting for her to realize she wasn't the only one in the relationship. But she never did. And now, I was just a memory to her. I didn't want to be a memory. That's when I realized I wasn't doing this for revenge. I wasn't doing this to punish her. No, this was for me. This was the first step in reclaiming who I was, who I had been before I lost myself in the relationship. I wasn't going to live in her shadow anymore. I wasn't going to beg for attention. I wasn't going to stay in a marriage that left me empty inside. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I was finally going to start living for myself. But then, as I sat in the dim light of the motel room, my phone buzzed. I had been expecting it, even though I didn't want to. I knew Sarah would eventually reach out, but I didn't think it would come so soon. She had always been so detached, so caught up in herself. But there it was, a message blinking at me from the screen. "Henry, please. I need to see you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My heart didn't race. It didn't skip a beat. But my mind was racing, wondering what she wanted. What could she possibly say to me now? What could she possibly say that would make this all right? I thought about the last few days, the space I had given myself. I had started to feel whole again. But something about that message gnawed at me. The desperation in her words. The uncertainty. It didn't feel like the Sarah I knew. The one who always seemed so in control, so confident in everything she did. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think. Time to decide if I wanted to go back to the life I'd left behind. But deep down, I knew I was done with that life. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into something that was never going to change. I had changed, and I wasn't going to go back to being invisible. I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. A part of me felt guilty. It was hard to ignore that small voice inside my head that told me I was being cruel, that I should give her a chance to fix things. But another part of me, the part that had been suffocated for so long, told me it was time to put myself first. For once, it was time to be selfish. But before I could even make up my mind, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Her name flashed across the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Henry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize now just how much I've taken you for granted." Her voice was soft, and there was a hint of emotion there, but it didn't affect me like it used to. "Please, just let me explain." I listened to her talk, but it didn't matter. The words were empty. I had heard them all before. Promises, apologies, regrets. They meant nothing now. It wasn't about what she said. It was about what I was no longer willing to accept. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't need an explanation. I've already made my decision." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else dictate my life. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and there was no turning back now. I hung up the phone, turned it off, and set it down. The silence that followed felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't need her. I didn't need anyone. I just needed myself. And that was enough. The days that followed were strange. I had no idea what to expect, no roadmap for what came next. I thought I would feel a wave of relief, of freedom, but instead, it was a constant undercurrent of something I couldn't name, a mix of regret, curiosity, and, strangely enough, anticipation. I woke up each day in the motel room, the dull hum of the city outside my window, and wondered if I had made the right choice. The truth is, it was too late to turn back. I had already stepped into the unknown, and every step forward felt like a new version of me was emerging, one I barely recognized. I wasn't sure who I was without the safety net of my old life, my old routine. But the longer I stayed away, the clearer it became. I couldn't go back to that life. Not even for a minute. I had always been the quiet one, the one who said yes when I should have said no, the one who allowed things to slide, just to keep the peace. I let my identity dissolve into hers, and when I did speak up, I was ignored or dismissed. This was my chance to rebuild myself, to be someone I could actually respect. Still, I couldn't escape the pull of my past. It wasn't just Sarah that haunted me. It was the life we had built. The memories that were now tinged with a sense of bitterness, like a movie reel I kept replaying, hoping for a different ending. I went back to the apartment one morning. The decision wasn't planned. It was impulsive, but part of me knew I had to do it. There was something about facing it head-on that felt necessary. I stood in front of the door for a while, my hand resting on the cold metal handle. For a moment, I thought about walking away, about never going back inside, but I couldn't leave things hanging. The door opened with a creak, and everything felt strangely still. The smell of old coffee and unused furniture filled the air, the place looking almost untouched, as though time had frozen. Sarah wasn't there, of course. She hadn't been for days. I went to the kitchen, staring at the space where we used to cook together. The memories rushed back, the laughter, the quiet moments when everything felt right. But now, they seemed like lies. Illusions. The truth was far messier than anything I had ever allowed myself to see. I walked into the living room, sat down on the couch, and stared at the spot where we used to sit. It felt like a different world, a lifetime ago. I thought about everything that had led me here, the long nights of waiting for her to come home, the empty conversations, the hollow apologies. None of it mattered now. But then my phone buzzed again, and my chest tightened. I wasn't ready for it. Not yet. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as I glanced at the screen. It was Sarah. I hesitated, then swiped to open the message. I don't know what you want from me, Henry, but I can't keep doing this. I miss you. I miss us. Please, let's talk. Please let me explain. The words were just like the last ones, empty. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. I could hear her voice in my head, the desperation, the pleading. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it. It wasn't the first time she'd begged me to come back. I had been down this road too many times to keep falling for it. But this time, something inside me didn't want to respond. I didn't want to fix things. I didn't want to go back to being the man who waited for someone to love him, the man who waited for validation. So, I left the apartment again, this time with a sense of finality. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I needed to be alone with my thoughts. I spent the next few hours driving, just me and the road, not caring where I was headed. The city was a blur behind me, and for once, I felt free. It wasn't the kind of freedom you feel when you're excited or liberated. It was more like the freedom of shedding a skin you had outgrown. When I returned that evening, I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew she would call, but I wasn't going to answer. I didn't hear from Sarah for the next few days. No calls, no messages, just silence. But that silence wasn't a relief. It was the kind of silence that made me realize just how much of my life had been dependent on her presence, on her attention. Even now, without her, I was still trapped in the remnants of a life that no longer served me. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't go back. I couldn't be the man I used to be. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally starting to understand who I was. But the question that kept nagging at me was, who was I really, without her? And was I ready to face that version of myself? I spent the next week avoiding the apartment, avoiding the calls, and avoiding the one thing that could drag me back into the same routine. Sarah? It felt almost surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The apartment was a dark, empty place without the clutter of our shared moments, without the whisper of Sarah's footsteps echoing through the hallway. Every time I passed by it, I felt a tug, a pull that reminded me of all the unfinished business, all the things left unsaid. But I couldn't go back. Not now. I didn't expect Sarah to understand. She'd always been the type to think she could fix things with a well-timed apology, with promises of change that I always hoped were genuine, but never really were. The truth was, I had already given everything I could. There was nothing left for her to take. Yet, in the back of my mind, a nagging voice kept asking, what if? What if I went back and gave it one more chance? I was no fool. I knew exactly what that path led to. The same heartbreak, the same disappointment, the same empty space where love should have been. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a mistake by not confronting the situation head-on. One evening, about a week after I left, I decided to face it. I couldn't keep running forever. I had to go back to the apartment, not because I wanted to fix things, but because I needed closure. Something in me was still tethered to that life, like I was walking around with a heavy chain attached to my ankle. When I stepped through the door, the apartment felt even emptier than I remembered. The walls, once full of conversation and laughter, now felt like they were closing in on me. I could still feel her presence, lingering in the corners of every room, in the spaces where we used to sit together. But Sarah wasn't there. Of course, she wasn't. I didn't want to call her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was back. So I did what I knew best. I shut it all out. I grabbed the box of photos from the shelf, the one that contained all the memories we had made together. I started flipping through them, one by one. There was that trip to the lake house, where we stayed up all night talking about our future. The wedding photo, where she looked at me like I was her entire world. But as I stared at each one, it was hard to recognize the people in the pictures. Who were they, really? Had they ever existed? Or had they just been an illusion of what we both wanted to believe? I stopped at a photo of Sarah and me in the kitchen, laughing about some inside joke I couldn't remember. She looked so happy then. We looked happy then. It made me ache. The image of that perfect couple I once thought we were seemed so far away now, like a dream I was never really awake for. I set the photo down and closed the box. The memories were too much. I couldn't keep living in the past, trying to patch together a broken version of myself, a broken version of us. That's when I heard the knock. It was soft at first, almost tentative, like someone unsure if they should even be there. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't rush to open the door. I needed a moment, a brief second to gather myself. When I finally turned the handle, there she was. Sarah. She looked different, her eyes tired and red, like she hadn't been sleeping. There was a sense of desperation in the way she stood there, like she was looking at a ghost. A ghost of the man she thought she knew. Henry. She whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. I've been thinking about everything. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I can't live with myself knowing I did that to you. Please, let's fix this. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she was still trying to fix something that was beyond repair, or the look on her face, the one that showed she truly didn't understand why it couldn't be fixed. Sarah, it's too late, I said, my voice steady. This isn't something we can just fix with a few words. I've given you every chance. I've waited for you to see me, to choose me, but you never did. She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I don't need an apology. I continued, my voice firmer now. I don't need you to tell me you're sorry. I've heard it all before. What I need is for you to understand that this is over. I'm done being invisible in my own life. Her face contorted in shock, like she couldn't quite process what I was saying. You're really leaving? She asked, her voice breaking. I already left, I said. You just didn't notice until now. The silence between us grew thick, suffocating. She was frozen in place, struggling to find words that would undo everything. But I wasn't the man who would let her undo it anymore. Goodbye, Sarah, I whispered. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind. As I walked out the door, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality wash over me. There was no more doubt, no more wondering. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. It was time to face the future, alone, but finally free. It's strange, you know, how quiet everything becomes once you've made a decision you know can't be undone. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a haze. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my past, on the man I used to be before Sarah, before everything had become so routine, so predictable. In a way, I felt like I had been in a trance for years, waiting for a life I was never going to get. Now, in the silence, there was only me. I started to let go of the anger I thought I would feel. What was the point in holding on to that? Anger doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't fix anything. I had been angry for so long that I had stopped feeling anything else. It was easier to stay angry than to face the truth. But now the anger was gone, and in its place was something far more powerful: peace. The first few nights in the apartment alone were strange. The emptiness didn't bother me like I thought it would. I should have felt lonely, but instead, I felt liberated. I would have spent hours pacing, looking for things to occupy my mind. But instead, I let the quiet fill me. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I could feel the space opening up in my life, the possibility of a future where I wasn't someone's afterthought. But then came the knock. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't anyone I expected. It was my brother, Trevor. We hadn't spoken in months. I had pulled away from everyone in my life, and Trevor, who used to be the person I turned to for everything, had become just another face in the background. But there he was, standing in the doorway, looking at me like he didn't quite recognize me. "Hey man, can I come in?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I stepped aside, letting him in without saying much. I wasn't sure what to say, how to explain what had happened. My life had felt like a whirlwind, a series of broken pieces I hadn't known how to fit back together. And yet, here Trevor was, with his own unspoken questions. I didn't know if I should reach out. After everything, his voice trailed off, and I could tell he was trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry about what happened, Henry. I should have been there for you." It was the first time in a long time that anyone had apologized for not being there. And somehow, it hit harder than I expected. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not mad, Trevor. It's just, everything's different now, and I needed to be alone. For once, I had to figure this out on my own." He nodded, sitting down on the couch. "I get it," he said. "I've seen the change in you. But I just wanted you to know that I'm here, whenever you need to talk." We sat in silence for a while after that. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, the sound of life continuing as normal. But inside, everything was different. Everything in me had changed. Trevor left not long after, but I couldn't shake the conversation from my mind. It was a reminder that even though I had stepped away from everything I thought I knew, it didn't mean I had to walk away from everyone in my life. I could still be a part of something, but it had to be on my terms. It had to be a version of me that I respected. The next day, I found myself walking through the city, not really knowing where I was going, but not caring either. I wasn't running away. I was just moving. It felt good. I stopped at a park and sat down on a bench, letting the sun warm my face. There was a peace in the air, a calmness I hadn't felt in years. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. That's when I saw her. Sarah. She was walking across the park, her eyes scanning the ground in front of her. She didn't notice me at first, but when she did, she stopped dead in her tracks. "Henry." Her voice cracked as she said my name. I didn't know how to respond. The old part of me wanted to rush over and tell her everything was going to be okay, that we could still fix it. But I knew better now. There was no going back. I had already walked away from the version of myself that had been waiting for her. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. I needed to see you," she said, her hands trembling at her sides. "I've been thinking about everything, about us. I know I made a mess of things, but I want to fix it. I want to make things right." I studied her for a moment, looking at the woman I thought I knew. I could see the same person standing in front of me, but something was different. She looked vulnerable, fragile in a way I had never seen before. But that vulnerability didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that I had already made my decision. "You can't fix this, Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't fix what's already broken." Her eyes welled with tears, and I could see the pain in them. It was the same look I had seen countless times before, the one that made me question everything. But I wasn't questioning anymore. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I stood up then, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "I know you are," I said, "but it's too late." I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of my decision settle on me once more. I didn't look back. There was no need to. This was the end. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. It was hard to pinpoint exactly when everything shifted, but by the time the next week rolled around, the changes in me were undeniable. The silence between Sarah and me stretched on, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. I didn't feel the need to reach out. I didn't even wonder where she was or who she was with. For the first time, I felt like I was living in the present, not in the past, and certainly not in the shadow of a relationship that had been slowly killing me. But then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound of it broke the calm that had settled over me. At first, I tried to ignore it, but something in me told me to answer. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I was waiting for some kind of closure, or at least the finality I thought I had already achieved. I opened the door slowly, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities of who it could be. Standing on the other side was a man I didn't recognize, tall, with a confident air about him. He was holding a small envelope in his hand, his eyes intense as he looked at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. "I'm looking for Henry," the man said, his voice steady but with an undertone of something urgent. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, still standing in the doorway. Something about this situation felt off, but I couldn't place why. He handed me the envelope without another word, his expression unreadable. I looked down at it, confused. It wasn't addressed to me, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. My fingers brushed the surface of the envelope, and I felt a strange tension in the air, as though this was the moment something important was about to unfold. I looked back up at the man, but he had already turned and was walking away, not even giving me the chance to ask why he had come or what this was about. I closed the door and walked back inside, still holding the envelope. My curiosity gnawed at me as I sat down on the couch, my hands shaking slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. As I read the words, my stomach dropped. It was from Sarah. "Henry, I know you're not expecting this, but I need you to understand something. I've made some mistakes, yes, but there's something you don't know, something that changes everything. You need to hear the truth. Please, let me explain. I can't do this alone anymore." The words were raw, desperate, and they hit me in a way I hadn't prepared for. I felt a sharp pang of emotion that I hadn't felt in days. The guilt, the confusion, the lingering attachment I thought I had cut off. I thought I was over it. I thought I had closed that chapter of my life. But now, there it was, her confession, her plea, demanding my attention once again. I had already made my peace. I had already walked away. I had already accepted the truth that our relationship was broken beyond repair. And yet, here she was, reaching out with something that hinted at the past we once shared. Something about the urgency in her words pulled at me, and I knew I couldn't just ignore it. But did I really want to go back into that? Did I want to unravel all the progress I had made? The man I was becoming? Part of me wondered if I was simply being pulled back into a cycle of pain, into a narrative I had been writing for years without ever truly questioning why. I set the letter down and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. The city was bustling as usual, but it felt distant, almost foreign. For a moment, I considered calling her, asking her to meet, to explain. I considered revisiting all the emotions that had once tied me to her. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that no explanation would change the past. No apology would rewrite the story we had built together. The truth was already clear. I had already given everything I had to her, and it wasn't enough. I didn't want to be that man anymore. The man who waited. The man who hoped. The man who let his own needs be pushed aside for someone else's. I didn't want to lose myself again in that cycle of empty promises and unspoken expectations. I walked back to the envelope and put it aside. The past was the past, and I wasn't going to keep living in it. It was time to make a choice that would finally define who I was going to be. Not for her, not for anyone, just for me. And as I stood there, I realized that the decision I had already made, to walk away, was the right one. I didn't need her explanation. I didn't need her apology. I needed to be free. And that freedom wasn't something anyone could give me. It was something I had to take for myself. I took a deep breath, looking down at the letter one last time before walking away from it. There was no turning back now. I was finally, truly, ready to let go. The phone buzzed again, and I glanced at it. Sarah had called. But this time, I didn't even flinch. This time, I didn't need to answer. The past was over. And for the first time in years, I felt alive again. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind, but in the best possible way. I woke up every morning with a sense of clarity that I hadn't had in years. It wasn't about running away from the past anymore. It was about embracing the future, one that was entirely mine to shape. I wasn't weighed down by guilt, regret, or the remnants of a life I had outgrown. I was free, and that freedom, as simple as it sounds, was more than I had ever hoped for. The apartment, once a place of suffocating memories, slowly transformed. I made it my own, a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and brought in small touches that made it feel like my place. Every corner I looked at was a reminder of how far I had come, of the man I had rediscovered. I began to meet new people. I found a group of friends, not based on shared history or expectations, but on mutual interests and respect. It was refreshing to connect with people who didn't have a preconceived notion of who I was or who I should be. I was finally able to be myself, without the pressure of living up to anyone else's standards. And as I did, I realized how much I had been holding back for so long. I started taking better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I signed up for a boxing class, something I had always wanted to do but had put off. It was tough, but it felt amazing to push myself in ways I hadn't in years. I also started journaling, letting my thoughts spill onto the page in a way that helped me process everything that had happened. It was freeing in a way I never imagined. One afternoon, As I sat in the park, I bumped into Trevor again. He had become a steady presence in my life in the last few weeks, someone I could talk to without fear of judgment or the weight of expectation. "How's it going, man?" he asked, sitting down next to me with a grin. "You look different." I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Yeah, I think I am different. In a good way." "I'm glad to hear that. You've been through a lot, Henry. But I can see you're finally taking control." "I am," I said, laughing softly. "It's weird, you know? All this time, I thought I needed someone else to make me feel whole. But the truth is, I just needed to find myself." Trevor nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "You've always been the one to put others first. It's good to see you finally put yourself first." We sat in silence for a few moments, watching the people around us, the world moving at its usual pace. But for once, it felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. A few days later, I received a letter from Sarah. It wasn't a long letter, but it was enough. She had apologized again, but this time, there was no desperation in her words. There was only a sense of closure, a recognition that the path we had been on had reached its end. I read the letter with no emotion. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. I had nothing left to prove to her, or to myself. The healing had already begun, and it was something I couldn't have done with her still in my life. I never responded. I didn't need to. The last step in my journey was simple: to forgive myself. For staying too long. For waiting too long. For letting myself fade into the background. And once I did, everything shifted. I began to feel a peace that was unlike anything I'd ever known. I stopped looking back. The past, with all its brokenness and pain, had no place in my future. I found a new job that I loved, something that challenged me in ways I never expected. I took the time to explore new hobbies, travel to places I had always dreamed of, and, most importantly, enjoy my own company. Life, for the first time in years, felt full. I wasn't waiting for someone else to complete me. I was complete on my own. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I couldn't help but smile. It was a smile born from the knowledge that I had survived, and not only that, I had thrived. The future was mine to write, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next.